Hello everyone, welcome to Earth Archives. If we were to choose the most famous but mysterious person in human history, I believe Shakespeare would be the first choice, because he has so many masterpieces, but his life and even his family are mysteries. Today, let's talk about who is Shakespeare's story. Please subscribe to the show before it starts, and share it with your friends if possible. As the greatest playwright in history, William Shakespeare's profound impact on human literature is beyond dispute. His timeless works, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, King Lear, Macbeth, Othello, The Merchant of Venice, The Taming of the Shrew, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, continue to resonate across the centuries, celebrated and studied around the world. The renowned Austrian modernist writer Robert Musil once wrote, "Shakespeare, without a brick or a stone, created an artistic world with only air. The characters he created come from the Baroque eloquence of endless rhetoric. In this unceasing flow of dialogue, the characters suddenly emerge as if by magic. But what air did Shakespeare himself emerge from?" In truth, about 200 years after his death, doubts began to arise about whether Shakespeare had even truly existed. The reason for this skepticism? The lack of concrete records about him. Upon scouring all the historical documents, no definitive proof was found stating that Shakespeare was, in fact, a playwright. Over time, the questions surrounding his identity have not only remained unresolved but have grown ever more complicated. Mark Twain once remarked that Shakespeare was the most famous anonymous person on this planet. Twain, deeply skeptical of Shakespeare's existence, wrote extensively on the subject, attempting to uncover the true identity behind the playwright. His investigations raised suspicions and, for some, deepened the mystery surrounding one of the greatest figures in literary history. Aside from Mark Twain, a large portion of the world has firmly believed for centuries that the true authorship of the Shakespearean plays we read today lies with someone else. For this truth, many have fought tirelessly, spending over 200 years searching for evidence. Unlike many writers who became famous posthumously, Shakespeare's works were already highly popular during his lifetime, and he was a well-known figure in England. Yet, despite his fame, scholars have expended immense effort to gather information about this literary genius, only to uncover just over 30 insignificant pieces of reference material. Though Shakespeare lived over 400 years ago, this remains highly peculiar. When compared to Michelangelo, who lived 89 years before Shakespeare, Galileo, his contemporary, or even Isaac Newton, who was born 70 years after him, the amount of material on Shakespeare is astonishingly scant. Even lesser-known poets from the same era have far more documented records than the bard. By the time of Queen Victoria's reign, the conditions for preserving records were well established. Printing presses were in use, stationery was widely available, and literacy was common. Given these conditions, it is nearly unimaginable that no significant records were found about Shakespeare's life and works. Shrouded in mystery, William Shakespeare's life and death remain as enigmatic as his works. One would expect that a man of such fame would be welcomed wherever he went, celebrated by all corners of society. Yet, oddly enough, in his own hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon, no one seemed to realize the significance of Shakespeare. His passing went largely unnoticed, and his funeral was almost ignored. We have heard of no prominent figures at the time lighting a candle to pen the words "Rest in peace" in his honor. Even more bizarre is the mystery surrounding his burial. During Shakespeare's time, it was common for bodies buried in churchyards to be exhumed after a period of time to make room for others. Yet, in Shakespeare's case, his tombstone bears a stern warning: "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here, blessed be ye man yt spares th's stones, and cursed be he yt moves my bones." Good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones. Such a curse on his grave might have kept people from disturbing the site, but there are rumors that after 200 years, someone did, in fact, steal his skull. Recently, scans of Shakespeare's grave have been conducted in an attempt to confirm this tale. Although the scan results do not definitively reveal the contents of the tomb, there appears to be some evidence suggesting that the skull is indeed missing. This only deepens the enigma of Shakespeare's life and death, with each new discovery adding layers to the legend of one of history's greatest and most mysterious figures. The more we uncover, the more questions arise, as if the man who transformed literature with his words was destined to remain a puzzle, forever elusive, even in death. Shakespeare's absence of any personal manuscripts, letters, or significant personal belongings has puzzled scholars and biographers for centuries. After his death, the only trace of his personal possessions was a mention in his will, where he left his second-best bed to his wife. Beyond that, there was nothing, not a single script, poem, or letter. The absence of these materials is even more baffling when considering Shakespeare's stature as both a playwright and a scholar. He was reputed to have extensive knowledge in fields such as law, philosophy, classical literature, history, astronomy, mathematics, art, music, medicine, military strategy, French, and Italian, among others. How could a man with such a wide-ranging intellect and expertise have had no communication with anyone, no letters exchanged, no records of his thoughts beyond the plays and poems he left behind? Furthermore, many of Shakespeare's works were not original compositions but adaptations of existing stories and plays. Some were based on works that had not yet been translated into English at the time. Yet, despite his apparent vast reading and research, there was never a trace of a library or a single book found in his home. It is perplexing that the man who shaped the literary world, whose works are still revered and studied, would not have left behind the very materials that shaped his ideas. A playwright with no personal manuscripts, a scholar with no correspondence, a literary giant without a library, how could such a contradiction exist? The mystery of Shakespeare deepens even further, as these glaring gaps in his personal history only add to the enigma of his life and legacy. In the midst of the mystery that has long surrounded William Shakespeare's life, one particularly perplexing detail continues to haunt the minds of historians and scholars: the lack of evidence regarding his formal education. Official records claim that Shakespeare attended the grammar school in Stratford-upon-Avon at the age of 7, but left without graduating. Yet, despite the existence of these records, there is a glaring absence of his name anywhere in the school's documentation. No mention of him as a student, and no evidence of classmates who could vouch for his attendance. For centuries, this has raised questions about how a man from such humble beginnings, one who seemingly never received higher education, could go on to produce some of the most profound and eloquent works in the English language, works that are rich in historical, philosophical, and literary knowledge. How could he, without the benefit of a classical education, have penned such intricate plays and poetry that continue to shape literature to this day? Equally strange is the fact that Shakespeare's family, his parents, his wife, and even his children, were all illiterate. It seems incomprehensible that someone who would later become so renowned for his mastery of language and writing would come from a household where not a single member could read or write. Of course, one might argue that Shakespeare had no control over the education of his parents, but it raises even more unsettling questions that, as a father, he allowed his daughters to grow up without the ability to read. This contradiction deepens the mystery. How could the man who transformed English literature into a global phenomenon, a man who surely understood the power of the written word, not ensure that his own children learned to read and write? If Shakespeare truly was the genius we know him to be, he remains, uniquely in history, the only famous writer who allowed his own children to remain illiterate. This strange and troubling absence of documentation has fueled theories and debates for centuries. How could such a celebrated literary figure, one whose works have had such a far-reaching impact on the world, have left so little trace of his early life? Was he simply an enigma who existed in the shadows of time, or was someone else, the true author, standing behind the name that we all recognize today. Was Bacon the real Shakespeare? More than 2 centuries after Shakespeare's death, a woman named Delia Bacon, an American scholar, traveled all the way to England with an audacious request. She demanded to have the tomb of Sir Francis Bacon opened. It wasn't that she was hoping to claim kinship with the Bacon family. Rather, she believed she had uncovered a secret that could change the course of literary history. After years of reading between the lines, Bacon claimed she had deciphered the true location of Shakespeare's manuscripts, buried in the tomb of Sir Francis Bacon. Bacon theorized that the true authorship of Shakespeare's plays was not the work of a single individual, but rather a group of elite intellectuals led by Sir Francis Bacon himself. This noble playwright collective, she suggested, used William Shakespeare as a convenient pseudonym to shield their identities. The notion that Shakespeare's works could have been penned by someone of Bacon's stature seemed, to Bacon, a far more plausible explanation than the idea of a relatively unknown actor and businessman from Stratford writing some of the most profound works in Western literature. Naturally, Bacon's request to exhume Bacon's tomb was denied by the family, yet her theory took root. Over the next 30 years, the idea that Sir Francis Bacon was the true author of Shakespeare's works gained traction, and more than 250 publications advocating this theory emerged. By 1886, a group of like-minded scholars officially formed the Bacon Society, creating an academic movement dedicated to unearthing what they believed was the truth behind Shakespeare's identity. The strongest argument for the Baconian theory was based on the belief that Shakespeare's plays contained political codes and hidden messages that alluded to the true author's identity. According to Baconian scholars, these cryptic clues were not only embedded within the text but were also related to Sir Francis Bacon's rumored ability to create secret ciphers. For example, in the first act of Henry IV, the scholars claimed that by counting the dashes and extracting the first letter of every word at specific intervals, they could decipher the message, "Shakespeare never wrote a word." In 1883, one Baconian theorist, Orville Ward Owen, invented a decoding wheel, which allowed him to compare Shakespeare's and Bacon's texts quickly and efficiently. Using this tool, Owen concluded that Sir Francis Bacon, who had long been rumored to be involved in cryptography, was indeed the true author of Shakespeare's works. More sensationally, Owen even theorized that Sir Francis Bacon was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I, further fueling the myth of the Virgin Queen and her mysterious private life. For many, the theory that Sir Francis Bacon was Shakespeare persisted for decades, fueled by passionate believers eager to find proof. In 2000, an American author published a book titled The Shakespeare Code, in which she claimed that after studying a vast array of historical documents, letters, notes, and biographies from the Elizabethan era, she had discovered that all of Shakespeare's works were actually the product of Sir Francis Bacon's genius. The author suggested that the estranged relationship between Queen Elizabeth and her son, Sir Francis, had been the driving force behind the creation of the Shakespeare persona. While these theories about Bacon's authorship of Shakespeare's plays may seem far-fetched, they have undeniably captivated generations of scholars, writers, and curious minds. Whether true or not, the debate over Shakespeare's identity speaks to the enduring mystery and fascination surrounding one of history's greatest literary figures. In the end, the true authorship of Shakespeare's works remains as elusive as the man himself, an enigma whose legacy continues to inspire questions, theories, and unyielding intrigue. Marlowe's face behind Shakespeare. In the long list of candidates vying for the title of True Shakespeare, another name frequently surfaces: Christopher Marlowe, a playwright and poet from Shakespeare's own time. The theory gained traction when a portrait of Marlowe, unearthed from the dusty corners of history, was found to bear an uncanny resemblance to Shakespeare, sparking the theory that the two men might be one and the same. The argument grew stronger as scholars began to notice striking similarities between their writing styles, leading some to wonder, could Marlowe have been the real Shakespeare? However, this Marlovian theory has a fatal flaw. The problem lies in the simple fact that Christopher Marlowe died 21 years before Shakespeare. Marlowe was tragically stabbed to death in a tavern brawl in 1593, while Shakespeare's most famous works, including Romeo and Juliet, The Merchant of Venice, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Macbeth, were still to come. Clearly, Marlowe could not have written these plays from beyond the grave. But, as any dedicated theatre lover knows, no mystery is too complex to remain unsolved. Enter Wilbur G. Ziegler, an ardent supporter of the Marlowe theory. In 1895, Ziegler presented a solution to the problem. What if Marlowe didn't actually die in that bar fight? What if he had faked his own death, slipping away in secret to live under the alias of William Shakespeare? According to Ziegler, Marlowe then resurrected as Shakespeare and went on to pen some of the greatest works in English literature, surpassing even his earlier, well-regarded plays. While this theory does stretch the limits of plausibility, it illustrates the lengths to which people have gone to explain the mystery of Shakespeare's authorship. Could a playwright like Marlowe, so widely regarded for his poetic genius, have hidden behind a different name to produce a body of work that would go down in history as one of the greatest literary achievements of all time? Although we may never know for sure, the idea of Marlowe returning as Shakespeare continues to intrigue and captivate the imagination of many. In the end, the question of Shakespeare's true identity remains one of the greatest literary mysteries. Whether it was Marlowe, Bacon, or someone else entirely who penned the works we associate with the name Shakespeare, the mystery only deepens, adding to the allure of the bard's legacy. Each new theory and hypothesis seems to add a layer of complexity to the tale, yet one thing remains certain: the works attributed to Shakespeare have stood the test of time, continuing to influence and inspire generations, no matter who wrote them. The Duke of Oxford or Shakespeare? If the theory that Christopher Marlowe was Shakespeare stretches the boundaries of plausibility, the idea that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, could be the true author of the works attributed to Shakespeare carries a certain kind of intellectual gravitas. Proposed in 1920 by writer J. Thomas Looney, the Oxfordian theory struck a chord with those who found striking parallels between de Vere's life and the characters in Shakespeare's plays, such as Hamlet and King Lear. The theory quickly gained traction, and within 2 years, a group of passionate supporters formed the Shakespeare Fellowship to advocate for de Vere as the true author. As with all great controversies, the theory evolved and grew more elaborate over time. In 1952, Charlton Ogburn, a leading figure in the Oxfordian camp, pushed the theory even further, suggesting that the Earl of Oxford, Shakespeare, was not only the hidden author of the plays but also the lover of Queen Elizabeth I. This theory, which paints a far more dramatic portrait of the Queen's personal life, added fuel to the fire. Elizabeth, often referred to as the Virgin Queen, was, according to Ogburn, not only involved with de Vere but also bore his child. This illicit royal romance, coupled with the secret parentage of a royal heir, was an irresistible narrative for both history buffs and scandal-hungry readers. The theory of de Vere as the true Shakespeare continued to gather steam in the historical fringe, eventually making its way into popular culture. In 2011, the theory was turned into a Hollywood film titled Anonymous, which took the idea to melodramatic extremes. In the film, the Duke of Oxford is not merely the Queen's lover but also her secret son, making the historical intrigue all the more convoluted and thrilling. The film, of course, was widely panned, and rightly so. Its interpretation of the Oxfordian theory, while creative, was drenched in so much historical license that it made the true story feel almost secondary to the drama.